We had record rainfall for the month of May, and we have above average rainfall for the month of June. So my thoughts have kind of shifted towards whether or not this year is going to be a bad year for blight. So I thought I'd just spend a little time talking about it. Whether you're talking about early blight, late blight, or Septoria Leaf Spot, they're all fungal diseases, so you can kind of take the same precautionary measures. So let's just talk about them. One of the biggest things you can do to help prevent blight, in my opinion, is to water at the base of the plant. If you water with something like a sprinkler that wets down the whole plant, it's just asking for trouble, in my opinion, because since blight is a fungal disease, moisture is one thing it needs to flourish. So you don't want to help it get started at all. So anything you can do to water at the base, I use drip irrigation, but you can just use a garden hose or watering can. My dad watered for many years with his garden hose, but he always watered at the base of his tomato plants, and he had some beautiful plants. Probably the easiest thing you can do to prevent getting blight is to grow tomatoes that are resistant to it. And in general, hybrids are more disease resistant than heirlooms. You get a lot more variety and better flavor, in my opinion, from the fruit of heirlooms than you do with hybrids. But if you've got a real problem with disease in your garden, specifically blight, then you might consider growing hybrids if you're growing heirlooms now and have a big problem. As you can probably tell, I have the lower leaves trimmed on these tomato plants, and that's another thing that can improve your chances of not getting blight. One thing I do is I prune those lower leaves, and that gives it better airflow. I also allow some space between the cages. That increases airflow. And I also prune my tomatoes, or sucker them. If you don't know what a sucker is, I'll show you just a second. As the tomato grows, it has that main central stem, and at each place where there's a leaf, a new plant will try to grow there, or a new branch, and that's called a sucker. And as you can see, I waited a little long to cut that one loose. It had a pretty good sized stem, but we've got another one right here. You can see the main stem comes up, you got that leaf there, and then there's a sucker that's coming up here, and the main stem is right here where this new set of blooms is. What I can do when it's small is just pinch it off with my fingers, or you can use some pruners if it's larger especially. But just keeping less foliage on your plant is a great way to increase that airflow and decrease your chance of getting fungal diseases. Mulching is also something that can help prevent blight. I use wood chips throughout my garden. If you've never heard of gardening with wood chips, one thing you don't want to do is mix it with your soil, so I no longer rototill my garden. I just dig a hole when I want to plant something, and that's all the digging I do. But since blight can be in the soil, if you don't have your tomatoes mulched, then what can happen is when it rains, it can splash up on your lower leaves of your plants and infect your plant that way. Here's the pruners I usually use when I'm pruning tomatoes. They work real well, I like them, but when I prune tomatoes, I prune one plant, then I wipe these down with alcohol and sterilize them and dry them off with a paper towel. Then I prune the next plant. That way I don't risk spreading any sort of disease from one plant to the next. And another thing that I like to do is if I see a plant with any sign of disease at all, when I'm pruning, I'll save that plant for last. That way I'm even less likely to spread disease if I wait till the very last to do that one. Another thing you want to do is not grow your tomatoes in the same place every year or in the same spot in your garden every year. And for people with smaller gardens like myself, it can be kind of hard to do. After 2 or 3 years, it's hard to find a spot that you haven't grown in if you grow very many at all. I like to grow tomatoes. One thing that I have done to increase the amount of plants I can grow is to grow in straw bales. But it's important not to just plant your tomatoes in the exact same spot, because if you get any sort of disease in the soil in that spot, then your plants the next year can be at risk of getting that disease. Another step you can take to prevent it is to use a preventative spray. And this is one that I've used before and I'm using this year. It says it can be used for organic gardening, which is important to a lot of folks. It's called Serenade. And I've used it in the past, and in my opinion it's best to be used as a preventative, because once you have a plant that's got full-blown blight, then in my opinion that will really do not much good for it. It's best to try to prevent getting it in the first place, and that's a useful tool for that. And what I like to do is, of course, you want to go by the instructions on the bottle as far as how much to use, but I'll spray the entire top of the plant, and then I'll take my sprayer and also spray the underside of the leaves. And I've been doing that about once a week. The only problem with using a preventative spray, for instance this year we've had record rainfall, and when it's raining several times a week, it can be hard to do any good with a spray like that, because you spray it and then a thunderstorm pops up that afternoon and washes it all off. So that's probably the downside to it. But if you've got decent weather, I think it's a good tool to use among all the others that I've already listed. And finally, one thing that I do is if I see a plant that has any sort of fast moving disease at all, or a disease that could be really contagious to the other plants, I'll just pull it out of the ground. And that includes blight. I know a lot of people will try to squeeze every last tomato they can out of a plant, even if it's got disease, but I plant enough that if I lose a plant or two, I'm still going to get plenty of tomatoes. If you grow heirlooms like I do, even if you do everything right, there's still a chance that you could get blight. But it's better, in my opinion, to try to do a few things to prevent it instead of just taking a complete wait and see attitude. If you've got any tips to add to this list, please list them down in the comment section. I'm always open to great ideas. And if you're just now finding this channel and you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Otherwise, like, comment, and share. We'll see you next time.